You're nothing but a spoiled disappointment who's never earned a single dollar in his pathetic life, and now you'll marry Victoria Ashworth like the obedient puppet you are, or I'll make sure you end up begging for coins on street corners where you belong." The cruel words still burned in Alexander Whitmore's ears as he pounded desperately on the wooden door of a small cottage, rain soaking through his $1,000 suit. His Aston Martin had broken down 2 miles back. His phone was dead, and every light in the wealthy neighborhood had gone dark when they saw him approaching. A stranger in an expensive car meant trouble. But this modest house at the end of a dirt road still glowed with warm yellow light. The door swung open to reveal a woman in her late 20s, flour dusting her simple cotton dress, dark hair escaping from a messy bun. Her brown eyes sparked with immediate suspicion as they traveled from his designer shoes to his soaked hair. "Finally," Elena Vasquez said, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. "I was starting to think the agency forgot about us completely. You're 2 hours late, and you look nothing like I expected." Alexander opened his mouth to explain, but she was already stepping aside, gesturing him in with brisk efficiency. "I don't care if you're wearing a costume from some fancy job before this one. Papa's been asking for his new cuidador all evening, and frankly, you're the first person who's showed up in 3 weeks. The pay is $15 an hour, lunch included, and I need someone who actually cares about more than just a paycheck." The warmth inside the small living room hit Alexander like a physical embrace. Crocheted blankets draped over a worn sofa, family photos covered every surface, and the scent of fresh bread filled the air. Through an archway, he glimpsed an elderly man in a wheelchair, his face lighting up as he spotted the newcomer. "Miguel!" the old man called out in accented English, wheeling himself forward with surprising energy. "You came back! Elena, Mira, Miguel returned just like he promised." Elena's expression softened as she touched her father's shoulder. "Papa, this isn't Miguel. This is the new caregiver from the agency. Remember? We talked about this." But her father was already grasping Alexander's hand with both of his own, tears of joy streaming down his weathered cheeks. "I knew you wouldn't abandon us, mijo. I told Elena you were a good man, no matter what the doctors said about my memory." Alexander felt something crack open in his chest as this stranger, this father whose mind was slipping away, looked at him with such pure trust and happiness. When was the last time anyone had been genuinely glad to see him? When had anyone ever called him a good man? "The agency said you had experience with Alzheimer's patients," Elena continued, her voice catching slightly as she watched her father's joy. "He hasn't smiled like this in weeks. I can't pay much, but if you can help him remember even small moments of happiness." She trailed off, exhaustion evident in the way her shoulders sagged. Alexander noticed the medical bills stacked on a side table, the worn patches on her dress, the way she kept glancing at her father with a mixture of love and desperation. His father's voice echoed in his memory, worthless disappointment, begging for coins. But looking at Elena's face, hopeful, vulnerable, trusting him with the most precious thing in her world, Alexander made a decision that would change everything. "Yes," he said quietly, surprising himself with the steadiness in his voice. "I'm here to help." Elena's smile was like sunrise after the longest night of his life. "Thank you. I'm Elena, and this is my father, Carlos. Welcome to our home. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name." Alexander hesitated for just a moment, then looked into the eyes of the woman who had just offered him something no amount of money could buy: a chance to matter. "Miguel," he said. "My name is Miguel." "Miguel, you hold a fork like you're conducting an orchestra," Elena laughed, watching Alexander struggle with her father's breakfast the next morning. "Are you sure you've done this before?" Alexander nearly choked on his coffee. Black, bitter, nothing like the imported Colombian blend his personal chef served in bone china. Here, in Elena's tiny kitchen with its mismatched dishes and cheerful sunflower curtains, he felt more exposed than he had in any boardroom. "I'm adjusting to your father's specific needs," he managed, awkwardly attempting to help Carlos with his scrambled eggs. "Mijo, you eat like a prince," Carlos chuckled, patting Alexander's arm with surprising strength. My Elena, she cooks like an angel, no? Miguel appreciates good food, not like those other boys who come around here. Elena's cheeks flushed pink. Papa, don't embarrass our guest. Guest? This is Miguel. He's family now. Carlos winked at Alexander with the mischievous grin of a man whose memory might be fading but whose heart remained sharp. I remember when Elena was little, she said she'd only marry a man who could make me laugh. You made me laugh yesterday, Miguel. First time in months. The fork slipped from Alexander's hand, clattering against the plate. Marriage. He'd just escaped one arranged marriage, and now this sweet old man was already planning another. The irony would have been hilarious if it wasn't so terrifying. Papa gets carried away, Elena said quickly, shooting her father a warning look. Miguel is here to help with your care, nothing more. But as she reached across the table to clean up the spilled orange juice, her hand brushed Alexander's, and the spark that shot between them was anything but professional. She jerked back as if burned, her breathing suddenly unsteady. I should show you Papa's routine, she stammered, standing so quickly her chair scraped against the linoleum floor. For the next hour, Elena guided Alexander through Carlos's daily schedule with the precision of a military operation. Physical therapy at 9, medications at noon, and 6, favorite TV shows that helped trigger positive memories. Alexander found himself genuinely fascinated, not by the routine itself, but by Elena's unwavering devotion. You do all this yourself? He asked, watching her demonstrate how to help Carlos with his exercises. The state provides some assistance, but... She trailed off, gesturing vaguely at the stack of bills on the counter. I'm a seamstress. I work from home so I can be here for him. It's not much, but it's honest work. Alexander thought of his trust fund, sitting untouched and growing by millions each year while Elena worried about paying for her father's medications. The contrast made his chest tight with an emotion he couldn't name. You're remarkable, he said quietly. Elena's hand stilled on her father's wheelchair. Don't what? Don't look at me like that. Her voice was barely a whisper, but he caught the tremor in it. I can't. We can't. You'll leave when you find something better, just like the others. I won't let Papa get attached to someone who's going to disappear. But even as she spoke, her eyes betrayed her, drinking in his face like she was memorizing every detail. Alexander stepped closer, close enough to catch the scent of vanilla and fabric softener that seemed to cling to her skin. What if I don't want something better? He murmured. The moment stretched between them, electric and dangerous, until Carlos's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Elena, mija, your phone is making that angry sound again. Elena blinked, breaking the spell, and rushed to check her phone. Her face paled as she read the screen. It's Mrs. Henderson, her daughter's wedding dress. I promised I'd have the alterations done by today. She was already moving, pulling fabric and sewing supplies from a closet that served as her makeshift workshop. Alexander watched in amazement as she transformed into a different person, focused, skilled, her hands flying over intricate beadwork with the confidence of a master craftsman. This is beautiful, he said, genuinely awed by the delicate embroidery she was adding to the dress. It's just a job, Elena replied, but he could see the pride in her eyes. No, it's art. You're an artist. Elena's hands stilled again, and for a moment, her carefully constructed walls seemed to crack. My mother taught me. She always said that every woman deserves to feel beautiful on her wedding day, regardless of how much money she has. Your mother was wise. She was. Elena's voice caught. She died when I was 16. Papa's been my only family since then. Alexander felt something shift inside his chest, a protective instinct he'd never experienced before. This woman, who had lost so much and still gave everything to care for her father, who created beauty with her hands while struggling to pay bills, she was worth more than all the Ashworth shipping fortunes combined. Miguel, Carlos called from his wheelchair. Come here, mijo. I want to show you something. Alexander approached, and Carlos gestured to a framed photo on the side table, a younger Elena in a simple white graduation dress, beaming beside her parents. My Elena. She could have married that rich boy Roberto years ago, Carlos whispered conspiratorially. But she said money without love is just expensive loneliness. Smart girl, my daughter. She's waiting for a good man, not a bank account. Alexander's blood ran cold. A rich boy named Roberto. Expensive loneliness. Carlos's words hit too close to home, reminding him exactly what he was. A fraud playing at being a good man while hiding his true nature. What happened to Roberto? Alexander asked, his voice tight. Ah, he showed his true colors, Carlos said with disgust. Treated Elena like a possession, not a person. Thought he could buy her affection with fancy gifts and promises. Elena, she saw right through him. The irony was suffocating. Here he was, falling for a woman who had already rejected everything he represented. If Elena ever discovered who he really was, Alexander Whitmore, heir to billions, the same type of entitled rich man she'd already sent packing, she would hate him. But as Elena looked up from her sewing, catching his eye with a shy smile that made his heart race, Alexander realized he was already in too deep to care about the consequences. He was Miguel now. And Miguel was falling hopelessly in love with a woman who could destroy him with the truth. Miguel? Elena's voice pulled him from his thoughts. You look pale. Are you feeling all right? Alexander forced a smile, pushing down the panic rising in his throat. Just tired. It's been an adjustment. But as Elena returned to her work, humming softly to herself, Alexander knew his biggest challenge wasn't maintaining his false identity. It was figuring out how to become the man she deserved before she discovered he was everything she despised. Miguel, your hands are softer than mine, and I work with silk all day. Elena's observation, made while she guided his fingers over Carlos's physical therapy exercises, sent a jolt of panic through Alexander's chest. 3 weeks had passed since he'd stumbled into their lives, and he was running out of excuses for why nothing about him made sense. I moisturize, he said weakly, earning a raised eyebrow from Elena and a bark of laughter from Carlos. Vanidoso, Carlos teased. Miguel, you are prettier than my daughter. Elena, maybe you should take beauty tips from him, eh? Papa! Elena swatted her father's arm playfully, but Alexander caught the way her eyes lingered on his face, studying him with growing curiosity. Don't mind him, he's been impossible since his mood improved. That was another problem. Carlos was thriving under Alexander's care. Not because Alexander knew anything about caregiving, but because he genuinely enjoyed the old man's company. Carlos told stories about his youth in Mexico, his late wife's terrible cooking, Elena's childhood mischief. In return, Alexander found himself sharing carefully edited versions of his own experiences, painting a picture of Miguel that felt more real than Alexander Whitmore had ever been. Mijo, Carlos said, gripping Alexander's wrist with surprising strength. You never talk about your family. Where are your people? The question hit like a physical blow. Alexander thought of his father, probably still seething about the canceled engagement party. The society pages had been full of speculation about Alexander's disappearance, calling it everything from a nervous breakdown to a publicity stunt. My family and I, we don't speak anymore, Alexander said carefully. Ah, Carlos nodded with understanding. Sometimes, the people who share our blood forget to share our hearts, Verdad. But family isn't just about blood. Elena and I, we choose our family now. The warmth in Carlos's voice made Alexander's throat tight. When had anyone ever chosen him? His entire life had been about obligation, expectation, strategic value. But here, in this tiny house with its hand-me-down furniture and homemade meals, he felt more wanted than he ever had in his marble mansion. Miguel. Elena's voice was soft, uncertain. Can I ask you something? His pulse quickened. Of course. That first night when you arrived, You were wearing a very expensive suit. Armani, I think. Alexander's blood turned to ice. Elena's trained eye, the same eye that created intricate beadwork and perfect hems, had noticed what he'd hoped she'd overlook. It was a gift, he stammered. From my previous employer. Elena's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Doubt, suspicion. Your previous employer gave you a $5,000 suit? 5,000? Alexander almost laughed. The suit had cost $15,000, and he owned dozens like it. But Elena's question hung in the air like an accusation. Some employers are generous, he said lamely. And the watch? Elena continued, her voice deceptively casual. The one you keep hidden under your sleeve. I caught a glimpse of it yesterday. It looked like a Patek Philippe. Alexander's hand instinctively moved to cover his wrist. He'd forgotten about the watch, a graduation gift from his grandfather, worth more than most people's houses. In his old life, it had been as unremarkable as breathing. Here, it was evidence of everything he was trying to hide. It's a replica, he lied, hating himself for it. Elena studied his face for a long moment, and Alexander felt exposed, as if she could see straight through to his soul. Finally, she nodded, but the easy warmth between them had cooled. I should start dinner, she said, standing abruptly. Papa, Miguel, would you like to watch your telenovela? As Elena busied herself in the kitchen, Alexander caught her stealing glances at him, her expression troubled. He was losing her trust, and with it, any chance of something real between them. That evening, after Carlos had gone to bed, Alexander found Elena on the small back porch, mending a tear in one of her dresses by the light of a single bulb. Her sewing basket sat beside her, overflowing with projects that would keep her working late into the night. You don't have to do this alone, he said, settling into the chair beside her. Elena's hands stilled. Do what? Everything. Caring for Carlos, working all hours, carrying the weight of this household on your shoulders. It's not your responsibility. What if I want it to be? The words hung between them, charged with possibility and danger. Elena set down her sewing and looked at him fully for the first time that evening. Miguel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Alexander's heart hammered against his ribs. Okay. Are you in some kind of trouble? Are you hiding from something? The directness of her question caught him off guard. Elena wasn't playing games or dancing around her suspicions. She was giving him a chance to come clean, to trust her with the truth. Alexander looked into her eyes, those warm, brown eyes that had shown him nothing but kindness, and felt the lies burning in his throat. He wanted to tell her everything, about his father's ultimatum, about the fortune he'd walked away from, about how she'd saved him without even knowing it. Everyone is hiding from something, he said instead, choosing the coward's path. Elena's face fell, and Alexander knew he'd given the wrong answer. She'd offered him honesty, and he'd given her deflection. That's not an answer, she said quietly. Elena, no, it's fine. She picked up her sewing again, but her movements were sharp, angry. I understand. I thought maybe you were different. Different from what? From the others who've passed through our lives. Men who take what they need and leave when things get complicated. Her words cut deep because they were true. Wasn't that exactly what he was doing? Taking their kindness, their trust, their love, while giving nothing real in return? I'm not going anywhere, he said desperately. Elena looked up at him, and for a moment, he saw vulnerability flicker across her features. Promise me something, Miguel. Anything. Promise me that when you do leave, and you will leave, because everyone always does, you'll do it cleanly. Don't let Papa get more attached than he already is. Don't make promises you can't keep. The pain in her voice was like a knife to his chest. How many times had she been abandoned? How many people had she trusted who had ultimately let her down? Elena, promise me, she insisted, her voice breaking slightly. Alexander reached for her hand, covering it with both of his own. Her skin was warm, calloused from her work, real in a way that nothing in his previous life had ever been. I promise, he whispered, even as the words tore something inside him apart. Elena nodded and gently extracted her hand from his. Good. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to finish. She gathered her sewing and headed inside, leaving Alexander alone on the porch with the weight of his deception pressing down like a stone. He'd just made a promise he couldn't keep to a woman who deserved so much better than his lies. In the distance, a car engine rumbled to life, and Alexander felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. His time was running out. Soon his father would find him. Soon the truth would come out. And when it did, Elena would discover that Miguel, the man she was beginning to trust, maybe even love, had never existed at all. Through the window, he watched her moving around the kitchen, her silhouette graceful and strong. Tomorrow, he decided, he would start telling her the truth. He would find a way to explain everything, to make her understand that his feelings for her were real, even if everything else had been a lie. But tomorrow would bring its own revelations, and Alexander Whitmore was about to learn that some truths, once unleashed, can never be taken back. Mr. Alexander Whitmore, your father is offering a $50,000 reward for information about your whereabouts. The voice came from Elena's small television, where a morning news anchor displayed Alexander's photograph, the same corporate headshot that graced Forbes covers and business magazines worldwide. Alexander's coffee mug slipped from his nerveless fingers, shattering against the kitchen floor in an explosion of ceramic and liquid. Elena stood frozen in the doorway, her face draining of all color as her eyes moved between the television screen and the man she'd known as Miguel. Carlos sat in his wheelchair beside her, confusion clouding his features as he tried to process what he was seeing. The heir to the Whitmore Industries fortune has been missing for nearly a month, the anchor continued, oblivious to the devastation she was causing. Sources close to the family suggest he disappeared following a dispute over his engagement to shipping heiress Victoria Ashworth. Anyone with information is urged to contact. Elena lunged for the remote, switching off the television with trembling hands. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Alexander's ragged breathing and the distant ticking of the kitchen clock. Miguel? Carlos's voice was small, lost. Why is your picture on the TV? Why are they calling you Alexander? Elena's eyes blazed with a fury Alexander had never seen before, her entire body shaking with the force of her anger and betrayal. Because that's who he really is, Papa. Alexander Whitmore, the billionaire who's been lying to us for weeks. No, Carlos shook his head, his hands reaching out toward Alexander with desperate confusion. No, this is Miguel. Miguel is good. Miguel helps me remember things. Miguel makes Elena smile. The old man's defense of him made Alexander feel physically sick. He'd taken advantage of Carlos's condition, used his illness as a shield for his deception. The guilt was suffocating. Elena, please let me explain. Alexander started, moving toward her. Don't. Elena's voice was low, dangerous. Don't you dare come near me. Don't you dare say another word with that lying mouth. She was magnificent in her rage, her dark eyes sparking with an inner fire that made her more beautiful than ever. And Alexander was losing her, watching everything precious slip through his fingers like sand. You want to know what's really sick? Elena continued, her voice rising with each word. I was starting to trust you. I was starting to think that maybe, just maybe, I'd found someone who actually cared about us, and not what he could get from us. I do care. You're a billionaire, Elena shouted, her composure finally cracking. You have more money than most people see in 10 lifetimes, and you've been sitting here watching me worry about Papa's medication costs. Watching me work until my fingers bleed to pay our bills while you pretend to need a $15 an hour job. Each word hit Alexander like a physical blow. She was right. He'd watched her struggle, had seen the fear in her eyes when she counted bills, had witnessed her exhaustion as she worked late into the night. And he'd said nothing, done nothing, because revealing his wealth would have meant revealing his lies. "Elena, Mija, please don't yell," Carlos pleaded, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "Miguel is good. He reads to me. He laughs at my stories. He loves you. I can see it in his eyes." "His name isn't Miguel, Papa." Elena's voice broke on the words. "Everything about him is a lie. Everything we thought we knew about him is fake." Alexander felt something inside him shatter at the raw pain in her voice. This was worse than his father's cruelest words, worse than any business betrayal he'd ever endured. Because Elena's pain was his fault. He'd done this to her, to them both. "The money doesn't matter," he said desperately. "My feelings for you, for Carlos, they're real. Everything I've felt here, everything I've become with you, that's real." Elena laughed, but it was a sound devoid of any humor. "Real? You think anything about this situation is real? You've been playing house with us, Alexander, living out some kind of rich boy fantasy where you get to pretend to be normal. It's not like that." "Then what is it like?" Elena demanded, stepping closer, her eyes blazing. "Explain to me how a billionaire ends up lying to a poor seamstress and her sick father. Explain to me how you justify letting us care about you when you were always planning to leave." Alexander opened his mouth but found no words. How could he explain that he'd never planned any of this? That he'd been running from his own life when he stumbled into theirs? That somewhere along the way their tiny house had become more of a home than his mansion had ever been? "I was engaged," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "To a woman I'd never met, chosen by my father for business reasons. I ran away the night before the engagement party because I couldn't live that life anymore." Elena's expression didn't soften. "So you decided to live ours instead? You decided to play pretend with real people's lives? I never meant for this to happen. I never meant to care so much." "Care?" Elena's voice was incredulous. "You think you care about us? If you cared about us, you would have told us the truth. If you cared about us, you wouldn't have let Papa get attached to someone who was always going to disappear." Carlos was crying openly now, his confusion and distress breaking Alexander's heart all over again. The old man who had welcomed him as family, who had called him a good man, was watching his world crumble because of Alexander's selfishness. "I'm sorry," Alexander whispered, the words pathetically inadequate. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix this," Elena said, her voice going cold. "Sorry doesn't undo weeks of lies. Sorry doesn't change the fact that you're everything I despise, a rich man who thinks he can buy his way into people's lives and leave whenever he gets bored. That's not what happened, isn't it?" Elena's smile was sharp as a blade. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what Roberto did. Exactly like what every entitled rich man does. Takes what he wants from people like us and disappears when reality gets inconvenient." The comparison to Roberto, the man Carlos had described with such disgust, hit Alexander like a punch to the gut. Because Elena was right. He was no different from any other wealthy man who had used her and left. Worse, because he'd made her trust him first. "Elena, please, get out." Elena's voice was steady now, final. "Get out of our house. Get out of our lives. Go back to your mansions and your trust funds and your arranged marriages. Go back to the world where you belong." "Elena." "Get out!" she screamed, her composure completely shattered. "Get out before I call the police and claim that reward money. God knows we could use it more than you ever could." Alexander stood there for a moment, memorizing her face, knowing it would be the last time he'd see her this close. Then he looked at Carlos, who was staring at him with such profound disappointment that Alexander felt something die inside his chest. "Miguel," Carlos whispered, "why did you lie to us? We loved you. Those words, spoken in past tense, as if Miguel had truly died, nearly brought Alexander to his knees. He wanted to explain that Miguel had been more real than Alexander had ever been. He wanted to tell them that their love had changed him, had shown him what life could be like when it mattered. Instead, he walked to the door, pausing only when Elena spoke again. "You know what the worst part is?" she said, her voice hollow with grief. "For a few weeks, I actually believed that fairy tales could come true, that someone could love us enough to stay." Alexander turned back one last time, drinking in the sight of the woman who had changed everything. "Elena, I don't," she whispered. "Just don't. Haven't you done enough?" So Alexander walked out of the little house that had become his whole world, leaving behind the only family he'd ever truly wanted. Behind him, he could hear Carlos crying and Elena trying to comfort her father while her own heart was breaking. As he reached the end of the dirt road, Alexander looked back to see Elena standing in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the warm light of the home they'd shared. Even from a distance, he could see the tears streaming down her face. He'd promised her he would leave cleanly, without causing more pain. But as he walked away from everything that mattered, Alexander knew he'd broken that promise just like he'd broken everything else. Some lies, once told, poisoned everything they touched, and Alexander Whitmore had just discovered that some mistakes could never be forgiven. "You look like death warmed over, son, but at least you're finally where you belong." Richard Whitmore's voice dripped with satisfaction as Alexander sat across from him in the marble-cold dining room of the family estate. 2 weeks had passed since Elena had thrown him out. 2 weeks of Alexander staring at hotel room ceilings and trying to forget the sound of Carlos crying his name. "The Ashworth wedding is back on track," his father continued, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. "Victoria has graciously agreed to overlook your little breakdown. The ceremony is set for next month." Alexander's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "No." Richard's eyebrows rose slightly. "Excuse me?" "I said no." Alexander set down his fork and looked his father directly in the eyes. "I'm not marrying Victoria. I'm not marrying anyone you choose for me. I'm done being your puppet." His father's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "You think your little vacation in poverty gave you perspective. You think playing house with that seamstress makes you a man?" Alexander's blood turned to ice. "How do you know about Elena?" "I know everything, Alexander. Where you've been, who you've been pretending to be, how thoroughly you've humiliated our family name." Richard leaned back in his chair, his smile predatory. "Did you really think you could disappear without consequences? I've had investigators watching you for weeks. If you've touched her..." Richard laughed again. "Son, I don't need to lift a finger to destroy her. Your little stunt has already done that beautifully." Alexander stood so quickly his chair toppled backward. "What are you talking about?" "Sit down, Alexander. Let me educate you about consequences." Against every instinct, Alexander remained standing, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Fine," Richard shrugged. "Elena Vasquez, seamstress, sole caregiver to her father Carlos, who suffers from Alzheimer's, lives at 247 Maple Street in a house that's 3 months behind on mortgage payments. Do you know what happens when a mortgage company discovers their borrower has been harboring a fugitive billionaire?" Alexander's heart stopped. "She didn't know who I was." "Do you think they care? The media is calling it the greatest con of the century. Poor girl seduces rich boy. Probably planned the whole thing. Your Elena is now famous, Alexander. Unfortunately, it's not the kind of fame that helps a seamstress keep her clients." The room spun around Alexander as the full horror of what his father was saying sank in. "You destroyed her reputation. You destroyed her reputation the moment you walked through her door. I simply publicized the facts." Alexander lunged forward, but his father raised a hand, stopping him with a look. "Before you do something we'll both regret, let me finish. Elena Vasquez has lost her house, her business, and her father's care program. but I'm feeling generous today. Marry Victoria, and I'll make all of Elena's problems disappear. I'll pay off her debts, relocate her somewhere comfortable, ensure her father gets the best care money can buy. And if I refuse? Richard's smile turned glacial. Then I'll make sure she never finds work again. I'll ensure that every care facility in the state knows exactly who Carlos Vasquez is, the father of the woman who tried to blackmail a Whitmore. Tell me, Alexander, how long do you think an elderly man with Alzheimer's will survive on the streets? Alexander felt something snap inside his chest. This was his father's masterpiece, not just destroying Alexander's happiness, but using Elena and Carlos as weapons against him. The cruelest part was that Richard was right. Alexander's presence in their lives had marked them as targets. "You're a monster," Alexander whispered. "I'm a businessman, and this is business." Richard stood, straightening his tie. "You have 24 hours to decide. The wedding or their destruction. Choose wisely." Alexander drove through the night, his hands shaking on the steering wheel as he approached the familiar dirt road. He had to see for himself, had to know if his father's threats were real. But as he turned the corner, his heart shattered completely. A foreclosure sign stood crooked in the small front yard. The windows were dark, the cheerful yellow curtains gone. Elena's flower boxes lay overturned beside the front steps, their contents scattered and dying in the dirt. They were gone. Elena and Carlos were gone, and it was his fault. Alexander sat in his car for hours, staring at the empty house where he'd been happier than he'd ever imagined possible. As dawn broke over the abandoned property, he made his decision. "Victoria, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Alexander found his fiancée in the conservatory of her family's estate, surrounded by exotic orchids and the scent of money. Victoria Ashworth was beautiful in the cold, perfect way of expensive porcelain, untouchable and lifeless. "Of course, darling," she said without looking up from her tablet. "Though I do hope this isn't another romantic crisis. I have 3 charity luncheons today. Do you love me?" Victoria's perfectly manicured fingers paused over her screen. "Love? Alexander, we're adults. This is a strategic alliance between 2 powerful families. Love is for people who can't afford better options." "That's what I thought." Alexander pulled out a folder thick with legal documents. "I have a proposition for you." Victoria finally looked at him, her ice blue eyes calculating. "I'm listening." "Marry me next month as planned. In exchange, I'll sign over half my inheritance to you. Approximately $3 billion. After 1 year, we divorce quietly. You keep the money, I keep my freedom." Victoria set down her tablet, her full attention now focused on Alexander. "Why would you do that?" "Because I need to save someone I love, and this is the only way." "The seamstress?" Victoria's smile was sharp. "Oh, Alexander, you really have gone soft, haven't you? Do we have a deal?" Victoria studied him for a long moment, then extended her hand. "We have a deal." "But Alexander?" "Yes?" "Don't expect me to pretend this is anything more than a business transaction, and don't expect me to help you win back your little seamstress. That's your problem to solve." The wedding was a cold, sterile affair. Everything Alexander's heart wasn't. As he stood at the altar in his $1,000 tuxedo, saying vows that meant nothing to a woman who cared nothing for him, Alexander's thoughts were with Elena. Was she safe? Was Carlos getting proper care? Did she hate him so much that she'd never want to see him again? After the ceremony, as photographers captured images of the happy couple, Alexander's phone buzzed with a text from his private investigator. "Found them. Elena is working double shifts at a textile factory in Ohio. Carlos is in a state care facility. Sending address." Alexander closed his eyes, relief and guilt warring in his chest. They were alive. They were safe. But they were suffering because of him. It would take time to fix what his presence in their lives had broken. But he had a plan. Victoria had been right about one thing. Love was for people who couldn't afford better options. But she was wrong about Alexander. He could afford anything except losing Elena forever. As the reception swirled around him, Alexander was already planning his next move. The wedding was just the beginning. Now came the hard part, proving to Elena that Miguel had been real, that their love had been worth destroying his old life for. But first, he had promises to keep and debts to pay. Elena had given him everything when she had nothing to spare. Now it was his turn to do the same. The war for Elena's heart was just beginning, and Alexander Whitmore was finally ready to fight for something that mattered, even if it meant losing everything else in the process. "Elena, there's a man here to see you. Says his name is Miguel." Elena's hands trembled as she set down the industrial sewing machine, her heart hammering against her ribs. 6 months had passed since she'd thrown Alexander Whitmore out of her life. 6 months of 12-hour shifts in this Ohio textile factory and weekend visits to see her father in the state care facility an hour away. She'd seen Alexander's wedding photos plastered across every gossip magazine. The billionaire heir marrying his shipping heiress in a ceremony that cost more than most people's houses. The sight had crushed what remained of her heart, confirming everything she'd believed about rich men and their disposable affections. "Tell him I'm busy," Elena said, not looking up from her work. "Elena." The voice came from directly behind her, soft and familiar, and she spun around to find Alexander standing in the doorway of the factory break room. But this wasn't the polished billionaire from the wedding photos. His hair was longer, unstyled. He wore simple jeans and a cotton shirt, and his hands, those impossibly soft hands she'd once questioned, were calloused and scarred. "What are you doing here?" Elena's voice was cold as winter, though seeing him again made her chest ache with memories she'd tried so hard to bury. "I came to apologize and to ask you to hear me out." "You're married," Elena said flatly. "Whatever you think you're doing here, go home to your wife." Alexander's smile was sad, tired. "Victoria and I are divorced. As of yesterday, actually. It was always the plan." Elena's world tilted. "What?" "I married her to save you and Carlos. My father, he threatened to destroy you both if I didn't go through with the wedding. The marriage gave me access to my inheritance, which I used to pay off your debts, secure Carlos's care, and ensure you'd both be safe. I don't understand." Alexander stepped closer, and Elena caught the scent she remembered so well. Not expensive cologne, but soap and honest work. "I gave Victoria half my fortune to marry me for 1 year. It was the only way to protect you from my father's reach and get the resources I needed to fix what I'd broken." Elena stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. You paid billions of dollars to protect us?" "I would have paid everything," Alexander said simply. "Elena, what I did to you and Carlos was unforgivable. I lied. I used your trust. I brought chaos into your peaceful life. But my love for you, that was never a lie. Miguel's feelings for you were the most real thing I'd ever experienced." Elena's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "You think money fixes this? You think you can just buy your way back into our lives?" "No," Alexander said, and he pulled out a worn piece of paper from his pocket. "But I thought this might be a start." Elena unfolded the paper and gasped. It was a deed to the little house on Maple Street, now fully paid off and transferred into her name. But that wasn't what made her heart stop. It was the address listed as Alexander's current residence, a modest apartment 3 blocks from the textile factory. "You live here?" she whispered. "I've been living here for 3 months, working construction during the day, visiting Carlos on weekends. I told him that Miguel was trying to become a better man, that Miguel needed to prove he deserved the family he'd found." Elena looked up at him, really looked, and saw the truth written in every line of his face. The calluses on his hands weren't for show. They were real, earned through months of physical labor. The exhaustion in his eyes wasn't from late business meetings, but from honest work and sleepless nights spent missing what he'd lost. Carlos has been asking for you, she admitted, her voice barely audible. How is he? Better, actually. The new facility is wonderful. The doctors say his condition has stabilized, and he's been participating in art therapy. He painted a picture of 3 people having dinner together. He told the therapist it was his family. Alexander's eyes closed, pain flickering across his features. Elena, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I can never undo the hurt I caused. But I need you to know that every day since I left has been about becoming the man you thought Miguel was. And who was Miguel? Elena asked, though her anger was beginning to crack around the edges. Miguel was the man I became when I was with you. Miguel was who I was meant to be. Someone who cared more about Carlos's smile than stock portfolios. Someone who found more joy in your laughter than in any business deal. Miguel was the man who fell in love with a woman so far above his station that he knew he'd have to spend his whole life becoming worthy of her. Elena's tears finally spilled over. Alexander, I'm not asking you to take me back, he continued quickly. I'm not asking you to trust me again. Not yet. I'm asking for the chance to earn it. To prove that Miguel wasn't a lie. He was a promise of who I could become. Elena studied his face, seeing past the familiar features to something deeper. There was a peace in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a settled quality that spoke of a man who had finally found his true north. There's something else, Alexander said, pulling out another set of papers. I've used the remaining inheritance to establish the Carlos Vasquez Foundation for Alzheimer's Research and Family Support. It will fund free care for families like yours, research for better treatments, and support systems for caregivers. I want Carlos's name to be remembered for love, not loss. Elena's hand flew to her mouth as she read the documents. It wasn't just a foundation, it was a legacy, a way to turn their pain into hope for thousands of other families facing the same struggles. Why? She whispered. Because Carlos taught me what it means to choose your family. Because he called me a good man when I didn't deserve it. And I've spent every day since trying to become worthy of that trust. Elena set the papers aside and really looked at Alexander. Not the billionaire, not the liar, but the man standing before her with calloused hands and hope in his eyes. Miguel, she said softly, and watched as his face transformed with wonder. Elena, that's who you are now, isn't it? Not Alexander Whitmore, not the heir to some fortune. You're Miguel. The man who reads to elderly patients at the care facility, who works construction to pay for a simple apartment, who loves an ordinary seamstress enough to give up everything he used to be. Alexander, Miguel, nodded, not trusting his voice. Elena stepped closer, close enough to touch him, close enough to see the tears gathering in his eyes. Carlos was right, you know. That first day when he said you were a good man. I think his heart knew something his mind couldn't quite grasp. Elena, I love you, Miguel whispered. I love you more than I ever knew it was possible to love someone. If you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving that Miguel is real, that our love is worth more than all the money in the world. Elena reached up and touched his face, feeling the slight roughness of honest stubble, the warmth of skin that had been touched by sun and wind and real work. I love you too, she said, and watched as joy transformed his features. I love Miguel, the man who makes my father laugh, who sees beauty in simple things, who chose love over luxury. When Miguel kissed her, it was with the desperate gratitude of a man who had lost everything that didn't matter and found everything that did. Elena kissed him back with 6 months of stored-up longing, with forgiveness hard won and love freely given. There's one more thing, Miguel said when they finally broke apart. I know it's too soon. I know I need to earn your trust back completely, but Elena, when you're ready, when you believe that Miguel is here to stay, will you marry me? Not for business or strategy or family alliances, but because we choose each other, every day, forever? Elena's smile was radiant as sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Ask me again in 6 months when you've proven that Miguel isn't going anywhere. I'll ask you every day until you say yes, Miguel promised. And Carlos? Elena asked. He's been so lost without you. Carlos is the first person I want to see, Miguel said. I have months of stories to catch up on, and I want to hear about his art therapy. I want to be the family he painted in his picture. Elena took his hand, calloused now, real now, and squeezed it tight. Then let's go home, Miguel. Let's go be a family. As they walked out of the factory together, Elena caught sight of their reflection in the window. Not a billionaire and a seamstress, not a con man and his victim, but two people who had found something worth more than money. They had found each other. Behind them, forgotten on the break room table, lay the gossip magazine with Alexander Whitmore's wedding photos. But that man was gone now, replaced by someone better. Miguel, the man who had learned that the only inheritance worth having was love, freely given and received. In the distance, a billboard announced the grand opening of the Carlos Vasquez Foundation's first care facility. The tagline read, "Where every family matters, where love comes first." It was perfect, it was real, and it was just the beginning of their forever.